Hello chess friends and welcome to Azarov's chess channel and welcome to another great game of the Legends of Chess tournament in 2020. It's the world champion Magnus Carlsen versus Anish Giri, and to me watching the game between Magnus Carlsen against Giri is like watching the El Clasico in football. It's the best football game that can be played now these days. It's of course Real Madrid against Barcelona, and Magnus Carlsen is a Real Madrid fan. I'm a Barcelona fan. And recently, Real Madrid was winning this Spanish national championship in football. I was really so annoyed when I saw that Real Madrid is in front of Barcelona. But okay, Magnus Carlsen is probably happy with that fact. He commented also on Twitter that he congratulated Real Madrid for winning the championship. And in this particular case, really, Magnus is Real Madrid and Anish Giri is unfortunately Barcelona, because here Magnus Carlsen again really outplayed Anish with some great positional games, great tactical games. And as I said, I really enjoyed their games also because of the fact they're always a little bit trash talking on social media. They're making fun of each other, and I really enjoy the trash talking, but of course also their chess game. So we're checking out now the fourth game. So Anish Giri had to win this game in order to maybe make it to the Armageddon game, because Magnus Carlsen won one game of these four match games. Let's check out now the game here. Magnus Carlsen played with the white pieces and opened with the move d4. Anish responded with knight to f6, c4, g6, king's Indian defense, and now after knight to f3, bishop to g7, we have now g3. This is the so-called card spot variation. The card spot variation is a very flexible variation because both players have this very nice fianchetto bishops. So you have to be careful. Both players have tactical possibilities on dark squares from black's perspective, and of course from white's perspective on the light squares. Here, castling played by Anish Giri. We have bishop to g2, and now d6. Knight to c3, healthy developing move, and we have now knight from b to d7. Most of the times, when I play the king's Indian, I like to play something like knight to c6, bishop to f5. This is also very natural move, knight to d7, with the preparation to crack the position here with the move e5. In the game castling, we have e5, e4 played by Magnus. We have e takes d4, and now after knight takes d4, we have now a pawn structure, the so-called Maroczy-bind pawn structure. It means that white has this very nice pawn central control and also this very nice centralized knight. The problem for white now is that this bishop on g2 is blocked by its own pawn, so it's very hard to make this pawn roll. You have to prepare something like f4, e5 in order to make something happen. But if you play f4 immediately, then you also leave some spaces behind, then you could have weaknesses on e3. So you have to play sort of a slow build up with h3, f4, then maybe crack the position with the move e5. And the problem is now also that the c4 and e4 pawns could be in target, and if you try to overprotect them, then you could face some troubles on dark squares. So as I said, white has now the central control, has a little bit blocked out its own bishop, but black has of course a powerful diagonal, but has a little bit some space disadvantages. So here in the game, knight to c5. As I said, we can attack the weaknesses. It's the pawn on e4. In the game h3, as I said, Magnus is trying to build this attack with the move f4. We have rook to e8 and now rook to e1, protecting our pawn. Here, bishop to d7 was played by Anish. In my opinion, you should immediately try the move a5. It's really the suggested line by the engine. The idea behind this move a5 is to create a blocking system on the queen side. So this knight is then cemented on c5. Still it attacks the pawn on e4, and you cannot kick it away anymore with the potential b4 move. So if white plays something like queen to c2, I'm showing you this line because it will be very important for the continuation of the game, because there will be several mistakes by both sides. So that's why I wanted to show you what are the ideas of white and how to counterplay here from black's perspective. Here, the main idea now from black's perspective is to build the so-called Boleslavsky wall. That's the pawn structure with the pawns c6 and d6. It means that we are restricting now really this four centralized squares. The problem is that we have then a weak d6 pawn, but it's really a necessary move because you have to restrict with the move c6 the knight's ability to jump on d5. If that knight comes on d5, then white will create enormous pressure in the center. So if something like bishop to f4 happens, then you have knight to d7, and then you could again cement the knight, because here you see the knight on d4 is hanging, so far you cannot take the pawn on d6. So let's go back. In the game after the move rook to e1, Anish tried the move bishop to d7. Again, with the idea is to create this Boleslavsky wall, c6. In the game, Magnus tried bishop to f4, and now knight to h5. In the game, bishop to e3 played by Magnus, and now we have this move c6. This is, of course, this very powerful restriction idea, but you have to be careful around your d6 square. In the game, Magnus tried queen to c2. The idea behind this move is to get now a rook on the d file, and then the rook will be attacking this d6 pawn. Then we could also maybe try something like g4, kicking away the knight, and then follow with bishop to f4, really creating some dangerous pressure against this weakness. So a5. Now comes this idea, but it's a little bit different, different move order. In the game, rook to d1 was played by Magnus, and now queen to c7. So far, Anish is protecting the d6 pawn. Here in the game, queen to d2, and now a4. This was now probably Anish's mistake, because you don't have to make expansion here on the queen side. You can do that afterwards. First of all, you should really protect your pawn. After the move queen to d2, Anish should have played here rook to d8. And after something like knight to e2, it's a very important now continuation. You see, you have the opportunity to play bishop to c8. You stay with your bishop on this very active diagonal. You have still your rook connection, and what the most important thing is that you have protected your d6 pawn. In this particular position, black has an equal game. G4 could be a possibility, but now after knight to f6, you see you cannot play on this immediate idea to play bishop to f4, because your knight, your pawn on e4 is also hanging. So it's very, very tricky. But after the move queen to d2, Anish makes, I believe, this mistake a4, and now after knight to e2, there is no good way how to protect this pawn on d6. If you try something like bishop to f8, you see there is this tactical threat, bishop takes c5, followed with queen takes d7, and it's already a bad position for black. In the game, bishop to e6 played by Anish, trying to counterattack here on the against his pawn on c4, but Magnus simply takes. Queen takes, rook takes d6. You see your knight is hanging, and in the game, Anish tried to defend with the move rook to f5, but it's a little bit too late because Magnus plays now rook to c1. If you take now this pawn on c4, it's a losing game immediately, because we have bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, and now knight takes a4. You have to move the rook or you lose the bishop. If you take the knight, you see you simply lose the rook here on c5. So that's why after the move rook to c1, Anish tried bishop to f8, and here Magnus retreats simply to d4 and protects his pawn. Now white is simply up a pawn, which is not a small thing, of course. Now white has also the opportunity to double up the rooks on the d file, and also to continue to push with g4 and f4, because we have now a 4 versus 3 situation on the king side. So it means we have, of course, a pawn majority on the king side. So that's our direction of the attack. That's the side with where we should attack. So in the game, rook to a8, Anish is trying to connect the rooks again, and now g4. So knight to f6, we have f5, f4. Still, our e4 pawn is protected, and now knight to d7. Here, knight to d1, played by Magnus. If you try something like bishop to g7, I've analyzed also this line, because it seemed to me that this could be a good move, but it's not a possibility, because white has this immediate f5. After bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, you see your bishop is trapped. You cannot move the bishop anywhere. The knight on d7 has taken here this very important square for the bishop. So it's again a losing game. So knight to d1, here f6 was played, and now knight to f2. You see how Magnus Carlsen is slowly maneuvering his pieces to the king side, where of course he has the advantage. In the game, bishop to f7 was played, attacking here sort of the e4 pawn, but the e4 pawn is perfectly protected by the rook and also by the bishop and the knight. Here in the game, h4, Magnus can now continue to push, and now we have h6, knight to g2, g3, pardon me, and now after g5, h takes g, now f takes g5, and now after f takes g5, bishop takes g5, and okay, again Magnus has grabbed the pawn, but what Anish Giri has hoped here for probably is to create a blockade. Maybe we can cement somehow our knight and then never allow these pawns to move further. If that happens, of course, then black can hope for a draw. But as I said, Anish has to win the game. In the game, he tried the move knight to e5. We have bishop to e3, and now rook to d8. We have knight to f5. Very nice knight outpost. This knight is very well placed and can be really kicked away only by the bishop here. Maybe bishop to e6 or bishop to g6. But even if you take out the knight, then you basically help out white, because white will connect here the pawns and will have two connected pass pawns. Then it's a new position in which white has surely winning game. So rook takes d4 was played here. Bishop takes d4. We have a rook to e8, and now rook to c3 played by Magnus. Very nice move. What Magnus wants to do is this rook has a double function. First of all, it's always good to create this rook lift, because then we could have also some dangerous checkmate threats supported by the bishop, for instance, if this knight moves. But the more important idea here is to finally play the move b3. Because our main weakness in the position is, of course, the pawn on c4. So that's why we want to support this pawn with the move b3, but you have to have another protector. Of course, this rook to c3 is a very, very nice positional move here by Magnus. Knight to g6, we have b3, knight to f4, bishop to f1, getting this bishop into this opposite position where you're never allowing this knight to jump, because this bishop is restricting these two very important squares. We have knight to e6, and now bishop to e3. A3. Here Anish Giri supports the pawn, but it's really nothing special because the dynamics is off on the queen side. Nothing dangerous can happen here on the queen side. Basically, the whole game is coordinated here to the king side. E5 played by Magnus, rook to d8, and now knight to e4. Very, very nice move with the opportunity to cement our knight on this very, very active square on f6. Rook to d1, knight to f6. We have a king to h8, and now rook to c2. Here Anish tried knight to h3, but not a problem. We have king to g2, and now after knight to e5. The problem is now that there is simply too much dependency between these two knights. These pieces can be attacked, and here Magnus finds a really great move, a winning move. He finds the move rook to c1. In order to make something happen, you don't want to trade off the rooks, of course. Here Anish tried rook to d8, but now king to g3, and in this position Anish resigned, because you cannot do anything here. You don't have good squares for your knight. If you move this knight, then you lose this knight, so this knight is twice attacked. It's game over. In this position Anish, as I said, resigned. So great performance by Magnus. He won 2 games against Anish. So Real Madrid won against Barcelona, 2 wins and 2 draws. So incredible performance again by the world champion. Again, he takes now 3 points from the first match game. We'll see how this tournament will continue, but as again, Magnus is of course the top favorite to win this one. Congratulations, and of course congratulations to Magnus Carlsen's favorite football club, Real Madrid, for winning the Spanish football championship. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. It was really interesting to see how Magnus will play the Carlsbad variation. Very nice positional game. And if you want to see more games from this tournament, here's the link of this very nice tournament, in which, as I mentioned in my previous video, Vladimir Kramnik, the former world champion, and also Vasyl Ivanchuk is playing. And the cool thing is also that Vasyl Ivanchuk is also participating. So it will be really a great tournament with some great tactical battles. As I said, here's the link to my previous videos. And if you want to see the best chess games of all time, you can also check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.